Yeah.
Yeah, the Jack Carr one was pretty fun.
Mm-hmm.
He's super nice.
He seems like a really intriguing dude.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Man, he's everywhere now. I mean, I see him all over the place.
Everywhere,
so,
yeah. Yeah, really authentic, and it's funny because he's very strategic about like his life plan.
Oh, really?
Which is probably more strategic than anyone I've ever met. Because I asked him like if he ever planned on having a famous like Amazon show come out about his book, and he's like, yeah, it was part of the plan the whole time.
Seriously?
Yeah.
Holy cow.
We were like, did you ever think you'd find Chris Pratt to play the leading role? He's like, yeah, I knew it was going to be him the whole time.
Holy cow.
Yeah,
wow.
Pretty wild.
Is it out yet? I haven't seen it.
I think it's coming out in July.
I'm looking forward to watching it.
Yeah,
so.
It's going to be awesome.
The books were good, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the detail in them is pretty amazing.
Absolutely. It's just a cool story, how he did that, how he got into it.
Yeah.
After a career in NSW. So,
yeah, all the like detail he was able to.
Well, I'm not surprised now hearing what you told me about his strategic plan. So,
yeah.
I wish I was so strategic because it wasn't that at all.
Yeah. Some of his buddies say like they think he was a SEAL just so he had all the details to write really good books. Like he's that detailed that was part of his plan.
Yeah.
To have.
Sounds like it was.
Yeah.
Sounds like it was.
Pretty wild.
Yeah. That's pretty cool.
So let's start with your story. What was your childhood like? Where'd you come from? Where'd you grow up?
I'm a Montana kid. I grew up in Butte, Montana, west of Bozeman here. Came from pretty humble beginnings. My dad was a ranch hand when he met my wife. He grew up out in the Ruby Valley. My family's been out there for 5 generations. Met my mom on a blind date. They got married, and then he moved to Butte and started working in the mine. Was an underground miner initially, and worked for them his entire career. Started out underground and then went to school. Ultimately became a chemist and then worked in the laboratory doing assays on all the samples from the mine. So it started pretty humble beginnings. Was a typical kid. I tell everybody, I didn't start out as an athlete. I had a good life despite our humble beginnings, and really found sports, things like that later, about my freshman year in high school. And that really put me on a trajectory to ultimately, I think joining the Marine Corps, things like that. Started martial arts when I was younger, ultimately got into sports and really got a lot out of that. Graduated from Butte High, was a football athlete. Had a couple great seasons with the Butte High Bulldogs. Although we lost our state championship in both my junior and senior year, it was tough, but it was still a great experience and really, made high school what it was for me. And then got recruited by Coach Green at Montana Tech to walk on the football team. I wasn't good enough to get a scholarship, but he called me in the summer and asked me to walk on. I'd already planned to go to Montana Tech for college. Started out as a computer science major, ultimately ended up switching over to engineering.
The diggers, huh?
Yeah. And Coach Green was a big influence. He was a Vietnam Marine, was a radio operator in Vietnam. And that plays a part in my story a little bit later. But, originally my plan was to never leave Montana. I love where I came from. Ultimately was going to, get an engineering degree and find a way to stay here in Montana working. But I'd always admired the Marine Corps, always felt the need to serve. And honestly, it was a conversation that I had with a friend about halfway through my senior year in college. I've been talking about the Marine Corps a lot, and this friend finally told me, what, you need to stop talking about it and do something about it.
Just do it. Crazy.
So I did. I called the officer selection officer and told him I was interested in joining the Marine Corps. This was pre 9/11, so it was a long process to get in the Marine Corps at that time. I ultimately went on and graduated from Tech. Had to make the decision if I was going to, hang around in Butte and wait for the Marine Corps to call, or if I'd take a job. I'd been offered a job as an engineer in Long Beach, California.
Is that a chemical engineer degree?
Environmental engineering. Okay. Yeah. So took the job while I was waiting on the Marine Corps. Moved down to Long Beach, California. I remember my first flight on an airplane was when I flew down to Long Beach for the interview.
First flight ever.
First flight ever. Never been on an airplane prior to that. And then moved from Butte, Montana, 30,000 people, to Los Angeles County, 11 million people. Pretty big culture shock.
Yeah.
And it had a desk job. I mean, I was working on the 11th floor of a tower in downtown downtown Long Beach, California, wearing a suit and tie, carrying a briefcase. All with the promise that if the Marine Corps didn't work out, the company that I worked for, told me they'd work to get me back to Alaska or something like that, because they knew that Long Beach wasn't my jam.
Yeah.
9 months into that, the Marine Corps finally called and said, "Yep, we'll take you." So I called my parents and told them I was quitting my engineering job and going to officer candidate school. They both thought I was crazy. Wasn't sure, if I was doing the right thing. Then my plan was I was going to do 4 years in the Marine Corps and then come back to Montana, get a master's in geological engineering and stay in Montana again. That was 28 years ago now. So I went in for 4 years, ultimately ended up staying for just under 27.
Was your family, like grandfathers in the military?
I had some great uncles that served in World War II. I had an uncle that did a brief stint in the Army, but that was about it. It wasn't part of my family history, really. My dad couldn't serve because he had a physical disability in his arm, something that he told me he always wanted to do, but he couldn't. But like I said, I remember being like 9 years old, just admiring the Marine Corps.
Yeah.
And then, like I said, if that friend finally convinced me that if I didn't do it, I'd probably regret it.
Yeah.
So once again, plan to go in for 4 years. Every Marine has the same experience. You go through officer candidate school or another commissioning program like ROTC, something like that. Then all officers end up at the basic school, which is a 6-month course that every officer in the Marine Corps goes through, regardless of what their specialty is going to be. And it's all about training you to be an infantry platoon commander. And it's really that experience that I think gives the Marine Corps the esprit and the camaraderie that we have. Everybody has that shared experience on the enlisted side as well with basic training and then the Marine combat training. So got through the basic school, went through the infantry officers course, was in a new military occupational specialty that they just established in the Marine Corps called ground intel. And the idea, it was based on lessons learned from the Gulf War, where they needed their intel officers to have more of an operational focus. So we went to the infantry officer course first. Then we went to intel school, and then we'd go and we'd serve as a platoon commander in an infantry battalion. Okay. With the idea that we'd eventually progress into ground reconnaissance and then do intelligence staff jobs along the way. So I went from school to 1st Battalion, 1st Marines. Did a couple deployments on naval shipping. This was prior to 9/11, so we were deploying overseas for presence and to train with partners. Did 2 6-month deployments at sea like that. Came back, and that was the end of my 4 years. And once again, that plan was I was going to get out, but the Marine Corps offered me an opportunity to go be an instructor.
What year was this?
This was 1999.
Okay.
Offered me an opportunity to be an instructor. I thought that sounds pretty interesting. I think I'll go give that a shot. And so I did, and about a year into that instructor job in an Army school, the Marine Corps decided that they were going to stand up their own course, ground intelligence officer course. And I raised my hand and said, "I'll do that." And so they picked me. I moved to Virginia Beach, Virginia, and spent the next 7 months standing up this military occupational specialty course for new officers, writing all the curriculum. Had one other captain that was working with me, and then I was a course director for that course for 2 years. And then just like before, thinking about getting out, I remember writing in my journal about getting ready to come home to Montana. And the Marine Corps offered me another opportunity. Hey, do you want to go to 1st Reconnaissance Battalion? There's no promise that you'll be a company commander, but there's an opportunity. Yeah, it sounds great. So I'd just gotten married. And I remember driving across the country from Virginia Beach, Virginia to Camp Pendleton, California. My new wife, Marianne, asked me, "So you think you're ever going to deploy?" I'm like, "Well, I'm going to an independent battalion. That battalion typically deploys platoons." This was pre-9/11.
But close, right?
Getting close, getting really close. This was 2001, July 2001. This battalion typically deploys to platoons. And, the only time that I'd really deploy, because I'm more senior than I'd be a platoon commander, is if the whole battalion deploys. And the only time the whole battalion is going to deploy is if the whole division deploys, and that's really unlikely.
Yeah.
This was, 4 months before 9/11.
Crazy.
Yeah. So 9/11 changed all that, as you know. Ultimately ended up deploying as a company commander. I'd stood up Charlie Company, 1st Reconnaissance Battalion. This was a company that had been deactivated years and years ago. As part of the growth in the Marine Corps, they were growing reconnaissance. Standing up this company was one of those opportunities that I had. So I had the really unique opportunity to build the team from the ground level, get that company ready to deploy, and then lead them in combat in OIF 1 during the march up. And I'll be honest, I think that was I was my best self as a leader, as a company commander then.
On the ground.
On the ground, an organization that I'd stood up from the ground level, and we spent about 5.5 months deployed in OIF-1. As you know, the ground war went pretty quick. And my company was most often the main effort in the battalion, which really gave me a lot of pride because I knew how hard the Marines had worked.
Yeah.
And to become really good at our craft. And then on the Marine Corps' plan, once the ground war was over, was Marine Corps tapping out. We don't do counterinsurgency. We're going home and we're going to get ready for the next one. So on the redeployment back, our battalion operations officer had orders and he had to leave. So I moved up from being a company commander to being the operations officer in the battalion. Redeployed him home, and then even though we were initially told we weren't going back, about 3 months after we got back, hey, you're going back again.
Right away.
In 6 months. So we're getting ready to deploy back to Fallujah to run a counterinsurgency operations in and around Fallujah. My wife was 9 months pregnant the day I deployed. So I met my oldest son when he was 6 months old when I got back from that deployment. So,
crazy.
Yeah. The really great thing about it is I have a picture of meeting him for the first time, which is really cool.
6 months.
Yeah, 6 months. So, did that deployment, OIF-2. We were trying to figure it out just like everybody else when it came to counterinsurgency. The things in Iraq were getting pretty bad at the time, as I'm sure you can recall. Fallujah blew up while we were there. And it ultimately ended up losing a Marine and several Marines getting wounded pretty seriously in an ambush. The Marine that was killed his name was Captain Brent Morrell. This was a guy that I taught as an instructor. I remember when he came to the school, he had guns and he didn't want to store them on base. He brought the guns over to my house and stored them. So I knew this kid from his very beginnings in the Marine Corps.
Crazy.
Ultimately ended up recruiting him into 1st Reconnaissance Battalion. He was on the division staff. And I recognized what he had, pulled him over to the battalion, got him an opportunity to be a platoon commander, and he deployed leading that platoon in Bravo Company, 1st Recon Battalion. And then, like I said, on a patrol is basically the scout effort for a company that was moving from our forward operating base to a temporary FOB, and it ended up coming into an ambush. First vehicle got nailed by machine gun fire and rocket propelled grenades. Brent was the second vehicle in the convoy, told his driver to come to a halt, grabbed the Marines in his vehicle and went sprinting over the berm into the teeth of the fire. Took a round ultimately through the lower abdomen, ultimately ended up dying. So
crazy.
Given the part that I played in getting Brent to 1st Recon Battalion, that's been one of those tough things for me. So that's the bracelet that I wear today. So, but got through that deployment, and then the rest of my Marine Corps career went similarly. They kept offering opportunities. I kept saying, "Yeah, that sounds pretty neat."
Yeah.
I went from being an operations officer to I got an assignment at the Pentagon where I was responsible for all the ground reconnaissance capability in the Marine Corps, capability development. So think of like a program manager for the Marine Corps ground reconnaissance capability. Did that for 3 years, learned a ton. One of those experiences that you're really glad you did it, but you're really glad it's over because working in the Pentagons can be a drag for a while.
Yeah.
Went from there to the Naval War College, spent a year studying as a student, getting a master's degree, which was a great opportunity for me and my young family. Went from there back to 1st Marine Division, did some time as a staff, and then ultimately was selected to command 1st Reconnaissance Battalion as a battalion commander.
Crazy.
Deployed back to Afghanistan with them.
What year is that?
That was 2012.
Okay.
2012. So I deployed a year prior to that with the division staff, so I'd spent a year in Afghanistan as a staff officer, and then ultimately brought him back as a battalion commander. Through about just short of a 6-month deployment. This was the end of the surge, so President Obama was starting to pull people home. We were one of those units that were redeployed early. Ultimately ended up leaving the company, and the rest of my battalion redeployed after about 5 months. But we started out as battle space owners in the Sangan Valley. The battalion that preceded us, 3rd Reconnaissance Battalion, was there during the height of the fight, and they really drove the enemy out of the area of operations that we got assigned. So it was a relatively benign AO.
Yeah.
We spent a lot of time building capacity within the local government, trying to tie the locals to the government. Then ultimately, halfway through our deployment, got pulled out, got sent back down to Camp Leatherneck, and started conducting long-range raids for the division into areas that typically didn't have any coalition force presence. So we'd work up an area for about a week, then conduct a hellborn raid, just go in there and really try to disrupt the enemies, whether it was their rat lines or other operations that they had going on, picking fights, and then extract them after about a week. And that's how the battalion finished its deployment. Went from there back to the Joint Staff as a lieutenant colonel, and I originally had been assigned to go to the White House to be on the national security staff. Ultimately, that didn't work out, but that process got drug out so long that by the time the Marine Corps decided that they were going to change my orders, it was like the end of July. I graduated from the Army War College in May.
Crazy.
So they moved me to Washington, D.C., and just had me kind of just marking time, waiting for this slot on the national security staff to open up. Finally, by the end of July, they called me and said, "We're going to cut bait on this. What do you want to do?" And the military moves in seasons.
Yeah.
People start moving early spring. Most of the moves are done by midsummer. So I'm like, well, what's left? Because everybody's already moved. And my assignments officer told me, well, there's a job in the operations director of the Joint Staff. You're already in DC. I'm like, okay, I'll take that. That sounds pretty good. Mm-hmm. So next day, went in and reported in on the Joint Staff, and I remember checking in, and there's an Air Force Chief Warrant Officer there at the Joint Staff Personnel Office, and tells me, "Hey, you're not going to the J3. You're going to the Chairman's Office of Reintegration." I'm like, well, "What's that?"
Yeah.
He's like, "I don't know, but here's your boss's number. You give him a call, and he'll tell you." So my boss was a guy, an Army colonel by the name of Eisenhower. So I called him, and he explained to me that this was an office that the Chairman Admiral Mullen stood up when he was the chairman, with the intent for it to lead the DoD's efforts to help transitioning military service members and veterans reintegrate back into society. He had saw all of these nonprofits, all of these corporations doing a lot to try to help veterans return to civilian society after war.
Yep.
But he didn't see the Department of Defense doing a lot. So he stood up this office within his office of the chairman, put 5 field grade officers in it, and said, "Your job is to create effective reintegration pathways for veterans." When I first heard this, I was like, whoa, this is so far from anything that I've ever done.
Yeah.
I went home and I called some mentors, I called a couple general officers. And basically they straightened me out. They said, "You know what, Brian, I understand your concerns, but you need to bloom where you're planted." So I went back the next day with the intent to do that. And it ended up being, a life-changing event for me. Number one, it was a incredibly meaningful experience working with all these nonprofit organizations, all these corporations, trying to help veterans reintegrate, and the opportunity to interact with thousands and thousands of veterans that were going through this really challenging transition process. Mm-hmm. So I learned a ton, did that for 3 years. Ultimately ended up getting orders from there because I was a brand new colonel, got promoted right at the end of that tour, was a brand new colonel. The low guy on the totem pole goes where everybody else doesn't want to go.
Yeah.
I got orders to Okinawa, Japan, 3rd Marine Division. And my wife and I struggled with that a little bit because, it was a tough time. My father had just died, and my wife's family couldn't travel overseas for a bunch of different reasons. So we're like 3 years away. This is a really bad time. But ultimately, we decided it was the right thing to do, and I told the assignments officer, "We're in. Let's go." So we deployed on what was going to be a 3-year tour to Okinawa, Japan, with 3rd Marine Division. And the day I was unpacking my household goods, I got a call that I'd been selected for to command the Marine Raider Training Center at MARSOC, and I'd be going home in 9 months. Oh man! What was supposed to be a 3-year tour ended up being about a 10-month tour. It was still a great tour. 3rd Marine Division was an awesome place to be. Great division commanders, a really great tight staff, and really busy because they're training all the time.
In Japan.
Yeah. Was an awesome experience. Probably the best staff that I was on by far. But 10 months later, redeployed back home to Marine Special Operations Command. So the first day that I ever spent a day serving in Marine Special Operations Command was the day I took command of one of its major subordinate elements. So a pretty daunting task, as you can imagine. Opportunity to interact with a guy who ultimately ended up being a really good friend of mine, another colonel that I'd met at the command course as I was getting ready, who'd been in Marine Special Operations Command from the beginning. And he basically told me, you're going to have a mutiny on your hands because you're this outsider. And that kind of really shaped the way that I decided to take command. And
why were you considered an outsider?
because this was at the time where Marine Special Operations Command had its assessment and selection process established. Everybody that came into the MARSOC at that point were being assessed and selected. They'd come in through the process. I was a reconnaissance Marine.
Gotcha.
Didn't have the Marine Special Operations MOS, but it ultimately had been selected to command this training unit.
Yeah.
Which makes sense given my background.
Yeah.
But he just thought that would be a problem. Ultimately, that didn't be the case. That wasn't the case. I was pretty deliberate about listening a lot, really figuring things out before I decided that we needed to make any changes. Ultimately, really coming to a really clear understanding of what it was Marine Special Operations Command needed out of the training center, and kind of built a plan from there. Built a vision for what the training center needed to be, and started putting in motion a campaign plan to achieve that. I knew it was working when my Marines ultimately ended up using my words against me to do things that they wanted to do.
Yeah.
One of the things that I told them all was, it's a mindset I call win every day. If you're improving what you do, if you're improving yourself personally and professionally, improving your fighting hole, that place that you work every single day, just a little bit, then you're winning. The theory of the aggregate of incremental gains tells you that if you improve what you do by 1% a day, at the end of the year, you're going to be 10 times better than you are.
Yeah.
So, that doesn't sound insurmountable. It's easy. We can get 1% better.
Yeah.
Maybe not every day, but still, over time, that aggregates and you're going to get a lot better. So, that was one of the things that I pushed, was constant improvement on what we do, being very, very reactive to the needs of our customers, who are the Marine Raider Regiment, the deploying units that were going down range, and making sure that we were giving them everything that they need in terms of training in the way that they needed it, and ultimately ended up having a really successful tour there, and learned a ton. For me personally, the Marines that come through that process, assessment and selection, and the training at Marine Special Operations Command, are just amazing individuals.
Yeah.
The cream of the crop, and we'd assess about 230 Marines every three times a year, going through assessment and selection. Ultimately ended up, selecting only 30 to 40.
Yeah.
And every one of those 230 Marines were awesome Marines. So you can imagine the caliber of the individuals that were working in that organization. And just being exposed to that, seeing the things that they were capable of doing, really gave me the opportunity to really push the edges in terms of what we were doing training-wise, and really make some big gains, and really do a lot of good for the organization, because I had that caliber of people.
Were you overseeing selection and training?
Yeah, so I had assessment, selection, and then I had 14 different special operations courses that the training center ran. Everything from the individual training course, which was the course everybody goes through once they're selected, to qualify either as a critical skills operator or a special operations officer. And then, other special operations advanced courses that run the gamut, from CQB courses to breaching courses and everything in between.
Wow.
So all the formal training that happened at MARSOC happened at the Marine Raider Training Center. And then, one of the things that I keyed on when I took command was when my division, or when the MARSOC commander was talking, he talked about how the Marine Raider Training Center was kind of the cultural hub of Marine Special Operations Command, because everybody goes through that gate.
Yeah.
So that we spent a lot of time really working on the culture, establishing, what it was we wanted our Marines to be and do, what we wanted our organization to be and do. And that ultimately ended up bubbling up into the entire command. So that was a really meaningful experience, as well as getting the opportunity to influence the culture itself.
Yeah.
We spent a lot of time really trying to define what that meant through surveys and other things like that. Understanding what the Marines thought the culture was, and then building on that from there. So that was a great tour. Did 2 years in command there. Was selected by the commanding general to be his chief of staff, on the commitment that I'd stay in that job for 2 years as the chief. It was a great job. I mean, it was one of those jobs where your job's really to ensure that what the commanding general wants to get done gets done.
Yeah.
Enabling his staff and his subordinate commanders to achieve his intent. So I was at the top. I wouldn't say I ran, but I was a senior staff officer on about a 300-man staff that was really responsible for synchronizing and integrating all the activities of the staff and the subordinate commands to a lesser extent to achieve the commanding general's vision. And I was about a year into that, and I got a call from a buddy that told me this organization in Bozeman, Montana, Warriors and Quiet Waters Foundation, was looking for a new executive director. This was an organization that I learned about when I was on the Joint Staff working veterans issues. And I'd known a board member from Warriors and Quiet Waters from a previous introduction. So I called him and I said, hey, I hear Warriors and Quiet Waters is looking for a new ED. Do you think I'd be a good fit? And he thought about it for about 2 seconds. He told me, I think you'd be a great fit.
Well, it's cool you had that experience.
Yeah, you should throw your name in the hat. So I did that. Didn't tell my boss because I wasn't sure how it was going to work out. Ended up going through the interview process and ultimately was offered the job. And had about a 5-minute conversation with my wife. We weren't planning on getting out of the Marine Corps yet. I still had another year as the chief of staff at MARSOC. Then I was going to take another move and do 3 more years to get me to 30 years.
Yeah,
that was the plan. But I had about a 5-minute conversation with my wife, Mary Ann. Yeah, this is the right thing. We got to go for it. Then I was worried about telling my boss, the major general that I worked for, because I committed to him for 2 years. He was counting on that. He was going to be leaving at the end of that year, and he wanted the chief to be there for continuity as a new commander came in. And I was really concerned about it, I'll be honest. So I approached him, from the perspective that hey, I got a problem. I'd like to talk to you about it. And I remember when I first told him that I'd been offered this job, he looked at me and said, F. Brian, this place will fall apart without you. I'm like, damn, this is not going to go good. But over the course of about a 30-minute conversation, he came around to realizing that it was the right thing and told me, yeah, I think you should do it.
All in the same conversation.
All in the same conversation.
Crazy.
Well, I mean, it just shows you the caliber of leader he was.
Yeah.
Major General U.
Yeah.
So I did it. I submitted my resignation papers and I got out of the Marine Corps in about 4 months and moved here in June of 2020. Took over on July 6th as the executive director of Warriors and Quiet Waters Foundation. And like I said, it was perfect. I learned when I was on the Joint Staff that I was going to work in the nonprofit space when I got out of the Marine Corps.
Yeah.
Coming home to Montana was always what was going to happen, no matter what. So, this was the perfect circumstances coming together for my family and I.
Yeah.
So it was easy answer. Do it.
Yeah.
And that's what I've been doing ever since.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
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 And a lot of purpose there. I mean, keeping guys on mission, getting them back on mission.
Yeah. So, that's something else I learned on working with veterans on the Joint Staff. And that's the huge role that purpose serves in the lives of service members and veterans. And the way I like to tell people about it is this: if you think about it, when people come into the military, we all have a hierarchy of needs. They're all things that we need to thrive.
Yeah.
From the most basic needs like food and water to we got to have a job. We need connection, because we're human beings that evolved into being social animals, and ultimately we have to have some sense of pride in who we are, and we have to have some purpose in life. And when you go to the military, the military strips all that stuff that you had away. They break you down as an individual. They build you back up as a member of the team, and then they issue you that hierarchy of needs. They take care of it all for you.
Yeah.
They take care of your housing, your food. They take care of all your training and professional development. They give you a very, very clear purpose and a mission. And you have that for the entire time that you're in the military.
Yeah.
And that's what your experience is, a very strong sense of purpose about what you do. But when you leave the military, that's all stripped away. And you're essentially left to rebuild that hierarchy of needs from the get-go. A lot of veterans, the first thing that they're concerned about is getting a job, because they got to take care of themselves and their family. And that job doesn't necessarily always provide that purpose that they found as being a member of the military. And this can create huge issues for veterans.
Big fears.
Big fears. What am I going to do to replace that sense of purpose that I had? So I learned that. And I've been able to receive that, in huge quantities, being the executive director of an organization that helps post 9/11 combat veterans thrive. That gives me a sense of purpose every single day, something that I can get out of bed and be excited about every single day.
Yeah.
It's more than just the bottom line of some company. It's having a meaningful impact on hundreds and thousands of other individuals. Not hard to get behind that.
Yeah,
Not hard to get
changing
behind that at
lives,
all.
saving lives.
Yeah. So, I'm blessed because of that.
Did you have some of the transitional struggles your own, or did yours go just really smooth because of you just went from purpose to purpose?
Yeah, I mean, I tell everybody it went smooth, and I had peers, other colonels, Navy captains that told me when I was getting out that, hey, dude, your first year is going to suck. Just be ready for that. But I didn't experience that at all, and I think that's because I had that purpose again. I was falling into a job where in a lifestyle where that was exactly what I wanted. Plus, a job, and then plus the lifestyle that I'd longed for ever since I've been in the Marine Corps here, that you can find here in Montana, which was always a huge part of my life.
Yeah.
I'd known some people in the community, other service members that I served with in the community, so I had those ties. And then, the opportunity to interact with veterans on a day-to-day basis, it was all built right in. So I didn't experience that myself. I'd say my transition has went pretty smooth. Now, yeah, there's things that I miss. I mean, I miss the Marines. I miss the training. I miss those kinds of opportunities. But, the thing is that you can't do those things forever.
Yeah.
Being a Marine was getting harder physically every day. As you can imagine, after 27 years, a bunch of combat deployments, the body's starting to break down, things like that. So, you got to recognize that you're not going to be doing that, that stuff that was ultimately the stuff that kept you in initially forever.
Seasons. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what are you telling folks now that are getting out that aren't exactly blessed to find that purpose at their job? How are they finding that outside of their job?
Yeah, so I think that, that's not something that everybody's going to be able to find in a job.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, you have to have an occupation so you can take care of your family, be financially stable, have a future. And you may not be as lucky as I am where you found that opportunity to get that sense of purpose from there. But you don't have to get your sense of purpose, in my opinion, from your occupation. There are lots of other ways where you can find that. And I think that the hardest part for veterans to grapple with is figuring out what that is. What is going to bring your life meaning? What is your potential now that you're a veteran? Who are you? When I was a Marine, active duty Marine, that was a huge part of my identity.
Marine, yeah.
Every single day, putting that uniform on, wearing an Eagle Globe and anchor over my heart.
Yeah.
That was a huge part of who I was. How are you going to replace that identity? And I think it's really, going through the self-reflection and the hard thinking to really understand where you think you're going to find that new identity and that new purpose if you can't find it in your job. How are you going to do that as a veteran if you have to do something that doesn't, for a paycheck that doesn't give you the opportunity to do that?
Yeah.
My purpose is service and leadership. I'm blessed with the opportunity where I can do that in my job. But if I didn't have this job, there'd be other ways to do that. There are a lot of great organizations out there that allow me to serve and lead. Warriors in Quiet Waters is one of them. I'm employed there, but there are others. I'll name one, the Travis Manion Foundation. They have a program called The Character Does Matter that allows retired and former service members to find that purpose through teaching character and leadership to youth. So that's one way you could do it. There's, it's really a matter of figuring out what that purpose is, and then you can build it from there.
Yeah.
And then you can build it from there.
And I love the concept of your Hunt for Purpose initiative, because in my mind with Mountain Tough, we're always working with guys especially to find their why. And we know that sometimes you just need to artificially create that why until a bigger why takes its spot. So a lot of guys know that finding their why is going to get them on track, get them focused, but sometimes you have to artificially create one to get the wheels in motion. And so I think your Hunt for Purpose initiative does a pretty beautiful job of that with physical fitness, mental fitness, nutrition, shooting your bow. So how did you set that up?
I mean, that came from my experience as a hunter. I started hunting like most kids in Montana do because my dad did. And it was a fun time for me to go and hang out with my cousins and my uncles and my dad and, have fun hunting. But ultimately it became a lot more than that for me. My dad was probably the world's biggest introvert and stoic. Didn't talk a lot, really hard to get to know, even as a son. But he was a different person hunting. I mean, he'd tell stories, he'd laugh. He was just very open. So that's one of the reasons that hunting became so important to me early on, was because it gave me an opportunity to really connect with my dad in a way that I couldn't before. And then I joined the Marine Corps, and my opportunities to hunt became less and less. So I'd come home for a year. My dad wasn't an archery guy, so it was always rifle hunting. But that was that one thing that I was looking forward to every year, is the fall getting here and getting home for a week hunt. And then I went to combat, saw the things that I did. I was pretty blessed with regards to my combat deployments. Wasn't wounded, lost one Marine, saw some others wounded, but didn't have some of the experiences that so many others do, where, a ton of trauma. Yeah. But I carried some burdens from that. My first trip back home after combat was on a hunt. I wasn't with my dad that day on the mountain because he was older. He typically stayed in the truck at that point. He'd drop me off and pick me up. Ended up killing an elk in a snowstorm in the Greenhorn Mountains at a place that I call Solace Park. And I remember standing over that elk after that deployment and thinking, I'm honest, this may sound cheesy, but I've never felt closer to God than I did in that moment. And I really understood what hunting did for me, and really being able to find clarity, find some peace, and make meaning of those things that I experienced in combat. And I continued to go to that for the rest of my career. Come home. My dad died in 2015, so I picked up a bow again, and really focused on archery hunting from that on. And archery hunting has given me year-round purpose. In the Marine Corps, there were a lot of different reasons why I stayed in shape. To be an active duty Marine, that's a requirement. Yeah. But since then, my love for archery hunting is what gives me year-round drive to stay in shape. Gives me year-round drive to make sure that when I'm not hunting, I'm at home and I'm present and I'm taking care of those things that my family needs, that they're getting from me what they need, so that I have the time in the fall to go hunting. Yeah. I do things like go to the symphony with my wife and the opera and the play because it's important to her, and I want to earn that. I want to earn that opportunity when September rolls around to step aside and say, honey, I'm going to the mountains, and her being okay with that. Yeah. So it ensures that I'm just getting better in every domain of my life because I'm an archery elk hunter. And it was that experience that gave me the idea for Hunt for Purpose. Warriors in Quiet Waters exists to help post 9/11 combat veterans thrive. And I think in order for veterans to thrive, they have to be living a meaningful life, a life of purpose. And I realized, because of my experiences as a hunter, what I gained from that coming home from combat, that was something that we could use to help post 9/11 combat veterans find more clarity on the answers to those big questions. Who am I? What can I do? What do I value? And what's going to bring my life purpose? And using archery elk hunting as a mechanism to do that, because, like you said, we've integrated holistic wellness into it. We brought in an integrative nutrition coach that talks to them about their nutrition because of the gut-brain connection and the profound impact that the food that you eat has on your physical health and your mental health. It's huge, yeah. We've brought in through MTNTOUGH and your all's partnership with us to focus on always being ready physically for what's going to come your way in the mountains. And then we brought in other partners like the Commit Foundation that have helped us bring them through this guided discovery process, where they're spending a lot of time really thinking about these big questions on identity, values, potential, and purpose. Is a deliberate part of the program where we're guiding them through exercises to think about this stuff. And then we're using archery elk hunting to reinforce that. So spend some time reflecting on, what's my life going to be going forward, and then going and throwing a ruck on your back and going and doing an archery course. And the science shows that, when you're doing things like that, recreating in nature, whether it be archery elk hunting, whether it be fly fishing, which is the core activity that we do at Warriors in Quiet Waters, in nature, it does some specific things for the human. Yeah. The first thing it does, it distracts you from your day-to-day challenges, because it's an activity that's keeping you fully immersed. As you know, you got to be present as an archery elk hunter.
Yeah.
You got to be present when you're behind that bow. You got to be present when you're closing in, all that. And then it provides you comfort because it's an enjoyable activity. And those two things together, the research shows, gives you a dopamine dump. And then the combination of that distraction, that comfort, and that dopamine makes humans better problem solvers. It makes them more creative. It gives them a better outlook on life. It makes them more vital.
Yeah.
They're more engaged in the world that they live in. And really, that's, those are the ingredients of thriving that we're looking for. So, I call them these learning moments. Create these learning moments where we can create the conditions for our participants to have epiphanies about what a life of meaning and purpose looks like going forward, by capitalizing on those physical and physiological and psychological things that happen to the human when you're spending time in nature in an immersive activity like archery elk hunting.
Yeah.
So that's the whole idea. So Hunt for Purpose is a 6-month program where we're bringing our participants back here 3 separate times. Started back in March, where we had the initial week where it was really about getting them all of their equipment, getting them fitted on their bows, getting them trained on how to use them, spending some time with their rucks on their back, teaching them archery elk hunting skills while we're going through this guided discovery process around those pillars of a thriving life: identity, potential, purpose, and values. So we spent the first week kind of as a ramp-up week doing that. That's when we first engaged with you all in the workouts, really got them moving on that. And then they went home. And in the time that they've been home, they continue to meet on a weekly basis with their volunteer companions. So these are the battle buddies that are going through this with them.
Yeah.
They can continue to engage in Mountain Tough's app to make sure they're staying up on their workouts. They continue to engage with our integrative nutrition coach, Karen Mitchell. And we've given them some other online tools like the Elk 101 Elk University, where they can continue to hone their archery elk hunting skills. They'll come back here the first week of June for what we're calling Hunt for Purpose Boot Camp, which will be a week-long, really intense experience where we're really going to dial them up on their archery elk hunting skills.
Yeah.
We're going to finish that guided discovery process around those pillars of a thriving life, and then they're going to go home after that first week or after that second week, and then they'll continue that remote work while they're home with their companions, and they'll come back in September and they'll do a week-long archery elk hunt. So
it's amazing.
Yeah. So we're splitting the hunters into 2 different cohorts in September. So there'll be 2 different hunt weeks. Really 2 unique experiences. One on a private ranch with a landowner who's always supported Warriors of Quiet Waters, and then the second cohort will be in the Bob Marshall Wilderness hunting.
That's amazing.
So, yeah.
And it's a serious deal, right? Like if they're skipping workouts and not taking this thing serious, they can just get kicked off the group.
We can't make them do anything. We've asked them to make commitments though right up front. It was the first thing that we talked about when the first week of Hunt for Purpose kicked off, was that this wasn't going to be easy, and we're asking you all to commit. And then doing it in a cohort, then you have that camaraderie, and you also have that pure accountability. And that's the idea of keeping them connected while they're home. We keep them connected around Google Classroom, different social media, and Zoom calls, so that pure accountability sticks. And we've seen it really. We haven't had to ask them to. I mean, they've been committed. They've been doing the work, all of the physical training work through your app. They've been connecting with Karen, our nutrition coach. They've been connecting with their companions and talking about the challenges that they're having going through the program, and really staying engaged. Some are dealing with injuries, things like that. So we've asked them to back off a little bit so they're ready for the boot camp when June rolls around. But it hasn't been a matter of making them do it. They've went full into it.
That's
I really think it's that camaraderie, that pure accountability, and the opportunity that we're offering them to really, figure out what a life of purpose looks like going forward. So.
And are you seeing some life change already?
Yeah, I mean, based on some of the discussions that we had after the first week, some conversations with a couple of the local participants that I've had here, with a couple of them, it's the right thing at the right time for them. Where they're going through a life transition where, they're really struggling about, what is my future look like? And I think it's really helped them a lot, become a lot more clear on that. I think it's also reminded them of who they were. Veterans in the post 9/11 era have all experienced trauma. They all come with their own unique set of challenges based on their own individual experiences that they had. And the problem with a lot of the discussions around veterans, in my opinion, in America, is that it falls at one of two extremes. Either everybody's a hero or everybody's broken and a victim. You know, that's where typically most folks that don't have an affinity to the military through a close connection, they're going to fall in one of those two areas. And the fact is that the vast majority of veterans aren't either of those. You know, they're ordinary people who've done and seen extraordinary things. And as a result of that, they've collected some residue. They've collected some challenges that they got to struggle with, like we all do. Yeah. But they're not broken. They're not victims. And what we try to do is to remind every one of them of, you know, think about that person you were on your best day in the military. You know, when you were at the top of your game. That person's still there. Yeah. It's just a matter of finding them. It's a matter of scraping away that residue, finding that person again, and then figuring out which direction they need to point and letting them go. You know, that's where that sense of purpose comes. I fundamentally believe that's what post 9/11 veterans are. And you know, I think if we're able to help veterans thrive, then we're going to be better off as a country. Yeah. Thriving veterans contribute to thriving communities. Yeah. And that means a better future for every one of us.
Better America, yeah. Yeah. And with suicide at like an all-time high, depression at an all-time high, anxiety at an all-time high. At Mountain Tough, we were spending a lot of time this year just challenging guys to just get outside and do something hard. Yeah. And we're not even particular about what that is. We just want them to put it on your calendar, do something really hard for you, and we need it to be outside because we know that it'll create that dopamine rush and lead to a life-changing moment. And just putting it on the calendar creates this like Spartan effect where because it's on the calendar, now they're training for it. Yep. And then the training sometimes is more transformational than the event itself. And that's kind of our big challenge for guys this year is do something really hard outside.
Yeah, that's where someplace that I arrived at over time. Like I said, you stay in shape and do hard things in the military a lot because it's what you have to do. And I recognized that was a piece of me that needed to continue once I left. I mean, it could have been easy not to do that kind of stuff. That would have been the easy answer. But I recognized that that drive that doing hard things gave me was a big part of who I was. I mean, let's be honest, it was part of my identity. So, doing hard things is a big part of my life. It's something I beat into my kids. I got 2 teenage boys. They're tired of hearing it from their dad. Do hard things. You need more grit. But I fundamentally believe that's an essential aspect of people's lives in order to be able to thrive. I think as human beings, that's built into us, and it's a matter of really figuring out where those frontiers are and pushing to them, and hopefully beyond them. And I'm not surprised that they find the training itself more meaningful than the actual experience, because that's really where you're able to push yourselves to those limits with no real risk, but you're really going to learn a ton about yourself and who you are.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, my wife and I, we used to be very into marathons and ultra marathons, and looking back at those years that we did a lot of that, in hindsight now, it was the training for those big events that was so special, because it's like the event is just one day, but it takes an entire summer of training to get ready for that event, which changes the whole trajectory of your life, because now you're on goal, on target all summer for something really big. Yeah,
it builds discipline in your life. It really does. And it creates habits, which are really I look back at my success and number one, it's the people that I worked with, without a doubt. A lot of people helped me out in a lot of different ways. People that I worked for, people that worked with me, people that worked for me. That's the number one key. But the second was being able to build routines and habits that gave me a work ethic that made me do the hard things and do the hard work necessary to be successful. It's those routines and habits that have really established how I run my life now. Every day is the same.
Yeah.
I eat pretty much the same food every day. I feel the same every day because of that. And I go home at the end of the day satisfied because of what I was able to get done. It starts out with early morning workouts. If nothing else goes right that day, at least I got that done.
Yeah.
So it's all part of those routines and habits that are critical for me personally. And that's something that we're trying to bring into Hunt for Purpose is, helping the participants recognize the opportunity that comes with building those routines and habits, because motivation is fleeting. If you try to do something because you're motivated to do it, you're ultimately going to fail because that motivation is not going to stick around forever.
Yeah.
It's really a matter of building the habits and routines that ultimately become a discipline, and ultimately an identity of who you are. I get up early and work out every morning ultimately because I'm an archery elk hunter. Yeah. And I want to be able to perform in the mountains. And you know what? I also want to be ready for whatever life throws my way, because you don't know. You don't know. I'm really good about how I eat for the same reasons. And plus it makes me feel better. I'm 52, 27 years in the Marine Corps, it's wore on my body a little bit. But, I found that through making sure that I'm staying away from grains and sugars, I don't have inflammation in my joints. Yeah. I'm not dealing with that pain. And that's, been some trial and error that ultimately I arrived at. And because I've established those routines of pretty much eating the same thing day after day, it's become a habit, and that's my discipline now.
You know how you're going to feel.
And I feel better as a result of it.
Yeah.
So,
what time are you working out?
Usually 6 o'clock.
At the home gym?
The home gym. I bought a bunch of equipment back in 2013 and been working on and off in a gym at home ever since. And I do it in the mornings because, I can never predict how my day is going to go. If I get it done in the morning, at least I got that done.
Nothing comes up in the morning. Exactly. No barbecues, no conference calls.
Yeah, and that's that's where I've established that routine. I get up pretty early. I get up at 4 every day. I spend the first hour reading. So that's another discipline that I follow. I said service and leadership is my purpose. I consider myself a student of leadership forever. And reading is a big part of that practice. So I try to read every day. And I'm not one of those guys that can roll right out of the rack and throw on my shoes and go work out. I got to wake up. I got to get a cup of coffee in me. Yeah. So that gives me about an hour to get ready. About 5:30, 6 o'clock, I'm heading to the gym.
Awesome.
So, yeah.
I wanted to back up on 3 things. One is, where were you at on 9/11? Where were you?
Yep.
What happened that day for you?
I was living in Oceanside, California. I was assigned to 1st Reconnaissance Battalion on the battalion staff at the time. And I heard about it as I was driving down College Boulevard in Oceanside, California to work. Heard about it on the radio. It happened 9 o'clock East Coast time, so this was 7 o'clock West Coast time. Heard about it, called my wife, told her what was happening, went into work. And, the whole battalion was in a big spin. We're ordering maps for Afghanistan, convinced we're going to deploy right away. Bases, things are getting locked down because there was a lot of misinformation at the time. A lot of false reports about other attacks coming in. And really that's what we did. We spent that day watching it on the TV, ordering maps for Afghanistan, and, starting the wheels turning to get ready to deploy because we were certain that it was coming immediately. Ultimately, we didn't deploy for 2 more years. But that's where I was.
Wow.
That's where I was. Yeah.
And where did you meet your wife at?
I met her when I was an instructor out of Virginia Beach. She had grown up in Ohio. She was living in Washington, D.C., working for McKinsey & Company. And she had an aunt and uncle that lived down in Virginia Beach, Virginia. It just so happened she went to college with the other captain that I mentioned that I was an instructor with. We were going out, and he knew she was in town, so he called her and asked her if she wanted to meet us. So I met my wife at Croc's Bar in Virginia Beach, Virginia.
That's awesome.
6 months later, we were married.
6 months?
6 months later.
Fast.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah, that was 22 years ago.
Crazy.
22 years ago.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
And then I wanted to fast forward a little bit to Marine Raider selection, and you talked about 230 guys 3 times a year, 30 of them making it through. What did you kind of start to see and boil down to as far as like the mental toughness and grit, skills and lifestyle habits and mindfulness? What got some of those guys through? What made some of those guys fail? What did you see there as general trends?
Yeah, so MARSOC stole a lot from the other services in terms of their assessment and selection. We were last military service to stand up a special operations command. So we stole a lot from the Army, stole a lot from the Navy in terms of how we put assessment and selection together. And ultimately, it boiled down to 10 attributes. And off the top of my head, I can't remember them all, but leadership, integrity, mental toughness were 3 of those 10 attributes. And we over the course of a pretty long selection process, we'd collect about 5,000 points of data on every individual. We had a software program that would take all that data in, and then it would display it in a way that we could kind of start assessing people's levels of these different attributes. So ultimately, that's what we were selecting for, those attributes. So, the Marines that didn't make it through were still great Marines. They, I told everybody we weren't looking for the perfect Marine. We were looking for a 10-pointed star. Those 10 attributes.
Specific.
Very, very specific. And, a lot of really great Marines that were physical studs didn't make it through for whatever reason. But, there were givens that you had to come to the table with. You had to be physically resilient because it's a long process. You got to have endurance. You have to be physically capable. You had to be in shape because we're asking you to move over long distances with a lot of weight on you. And you had to be mentally tough because that's the key, is that moving over that long distance with a lot of weight on you wasn't the test. It was what you did in that process. We'd force you into making decisions. We'd force you into leadership positions where you're on your physical edge and you still have to be able to respond to a certain scenario in a certain way. And that's where that really came in. It was more than just being able to do hard things. It was being able to function effectively on a cognitive basis, on a social basis, because we throw them into social scenarios as well, because that plays a big part in what special operations operators do. While you're under that physical duress, while you're at that physical frontier, being able to perform in those other domains was really what it boiled down to. So mental toughness played a huge role in that. And it wasn't something that you were given the opportunity to build while you're at assessment and selection. It's something that you had to foster as you came into it, because the process would weed you out really quick if you didn't have it, really quick. So it's like, being strong under high heart rate. Yeah. Same thing. Yeah. Being cognitively and socially highly functional while under extreme physical duress. Yeah.
Thinking while you're tired.
A lot of it boiled down to. Yep.
Crazy.
Yeah.
And how long was selection?
The Marine Corps' A&S is 6 weeks long.
Okay.
Yep, 6 weeks long. 2 different phases. First phase is all known problems for the candidates, where they're told the event that they're going to do. They're told what the standard is, and then they're asked to perform. So they know the answer. They know what they got to do. You have to throw 90 pounds on your back, and you have to ruck over this distance in this time. So it was known what you had to do to perform. The second phase was exactly the opposite. We moved into a different location, and everything was an unknown event. You'd be told to start something, and you didn't know how it was going to end up. And that's how pretty much the second half was conducted. And you were doing all that in a team environment. You were assigned a leadership role or not. And when you were assigned a leadership role, you were being evaluated on your ability to lead your team through that problem set, all with an unknown answer. You don't know what the answer is. You're given a problem. You're told what needs to get done in order to get it solved, and then how you do it's up to you. And like I said, a lot of uncertainty thrown into there, and that's once again where that mental toughness comes in as well, is being able to operate effectively in uncertainty. So
that probably broke a lot of guys down. The no end game. You just don't know when it's over.
Yep, absolutely.
And is there a Hell Week type event?
There's not really in the Marines assessment selection process, MARSOC selection assessment process. It's just a long build up of all these events cumulatively that it comes to. There's something very similar to that in an individual training course, though.
Okay.
Once a Marine's been selected, they got to get through the individual training course is broken down into 4 phases, and they have to get through what looks a lot like a Hell Week at the end of the first phase. it's constantly moving with about 90 pounds on your back, getting very, very little sleep, being thrown a couple new problem sets every day in a team environment. So not the same as Hell Week, but I think it achieves similar results. So
That's
yeah.
and that's a lot of heavy pack rucking work was happening there though, which
Yeah, it was a constant condition of it.
yeah,
Everything that they did, it was moving over long distances with a lot of weight on your back.
heavy loads.
Yeah.
What kind of distances would you see?
Well, in that week that I talked about, in that first phase, I'm trying to remember. I want to say they were moving over 7 days, close to 90 miles. 90 miles with about 90-pound packs.
Crazy.
So, yeah. In assessment and selection, the longest known distance hike was 12 miles. 12 miles, and once again done to a time standard. So the Marines aren't walking. I mean, in order to meet the standard, you're at a minimum shuffling.
You're jogging,
Yeah. Which
power walking.
ultimately, wreaks some havoc on some joints, but they're young. As the commander, I'd go out and do those rucks with them. Always knowing that, I'm going up against 20-year-olds. There's no way I'm going to be at the front, but I was in the front third. In the front third because that's what I felt I needed to do as a leader.
Yeah.
Show up and do that. And I didn't make every one. I didn't make every hike, but I tried to make as many as I could. So that was a huge component of it.
Was there like a mental toughness hack or mindset hack or mind trick that you saw was helping a lot of those guys pass that?
Yeah, so that's the other thing that I really got exposed to when I was at Marine Special Operations Command was the psychological aspects of performance. And Special Operations Command has figured this out. I had a couple operational psychologists on my staff that when we had Marines that were struggling, whether this was in the shoot house, whether it was in some other aspect of the course where we could bring them together with this operational psychologist and they'd put them through some cognitive work. Whether that was a mental toughness issue, whether that was being able to recognize the essence of the problem that they were facing. Our psychs helped us in every aspect of that. Whenever a student was struggling, they'd go and they'd see the op psych. This wasn't nothing that had any kind of baggage associated with it. It was all part of the process.
Performance.
And in most cases, these are professionals that they've spent their lives figuring out how to optimize human performance in that cognitive domain. So that was a huge part of it.
That's awesome.
It was a huge part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we see it a lot in here, just like the most mentally tough people. We've been studying them for, since 2016 now with our small lens that we get to see through the lab. But just watching that on the daily basis, you start to see things that most mentally tough people have, like we always call it like they're positive when everyone else is negative.
Yeah.
You'll see that with the hunters. They'll be the guy that when it's negative 20 and the snow's blowing in your face, he'll look at you and say, at least it's not negative 30. But as soon as you make that mental switch, you're like, yeah, I feel pretty good now. At least it's not negative 30. And so we start to kind of see those key characteristics.
We call that embrace the suck.
Yeah.
That's a huge part of it. That's a huge part of it. I think positivity is a huge part of it as well. Recognizing that things can always get worse.
Yeah.
I go back to, something I learned about, God, the name's escaping me now. Navy Admiral was a prisoner of war in Vietnam. And what he learned was, the thing that set those people that survived that experience apart from those that didn't were the optimists ultimately didn't survive because they would hope we're going to be home by Christmas. And when that didn't happen, they'd lose all hope and ultimately end up dying. What he learned was the pragmatists who were able to stay positive throughout it. They were able to accept life circumstances as they are, but still maintain a positive attitude in terms of how it can get better. Not putting all your buckets in this, this bag of hope that could get crushed. Being very pragmatic about the situation that you're in, but addressing it in a positive manner. I think that's key.
Yeah, that's in Man's Search for Meaning. The people that set Christmas as that goal, were literally dying a few days after Christmas from their mind.
Yeah, we read the same book.
Wild. Yeah. Crazy.
Yeah. Stockdale, Admiral Stockdale.
Yeah, Stockdale. Yeah, that's an amazing book.
Yeah, it is. It is.
So what are you doing nowadays with your boys to teach some of this grit and determination?
Yeah, so I learned early on, my kids were, you got to do everything in small doses. First time I brought my older son hunting, it was a backcountry hunt. We humped in the backcountry. Weather wasn't playing a great role. I mean, the wind was blowing like crazy the whole time, and really was wearing into him. I remember it was the end of day 2. We'd spent the whole day at high altitude, hiking our butts off in this high winds. Finally get back to camp, and I look at him, and you just tell he's defeated.
Yeah,
he's just done. So I recognized, there's a storm coming in. You know what? We're going to pull out. We're going to go back to Butte. We're going to go to a hotel room. You can shower up, and then we'll come back tomorrow afternoon. And as soon as I told him that, his whole attitude changed. Life was positive again. So everything in small doses, that's number one. But I do ask them to do things that push their boundaries. And this is something I tried working on when they were really young. My son, Tyler, my older son, I remember when we were in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, while I was going to the Army War College. He's always been a smart kid, did real well in school. And I used to help him study math. We had a room above the garage where we'd go up and pull out the whiteboard, and I'd put up problems for him, and he'd go through them. I remember prepping for a test for one of them with him, and then he came home, and I asked him how he did on the test, and he didn't do that great because he hadn't spent that time preparing. And I told him one time, I said, Tyler, you're a really talented kid, but your talent's only going to get you so far. You got to work hard too. And he took that, and that's how he's lived his life ever since. He's a National Merit Scholar, and he honored me with the essay that he had to write for that scholarship, and he wrote about those things that I taught him, and that was one of those things.
Amazing.
Doing hard things, the role that grit has in your life. And I've probably taken it to extremes. We wrote this Gilman family maxim that, it's about 15 lines of things that the males in the Gilman family will do. I had them both sign it and commit to that.
Awesome.
I go to it all the time. When they're falling short of that standard, we'll go back and we'll pull out that Gilman Code of Conduct and talk about what that means. I haven't had to do it recently in quite a while, but
what's a few of the things on there?
A lot. I can't remember the verbiage. I'll send you a picture of it. But
you should, yeah.
It talks a lot about discipline. It talks about how you treat other people. It talks about being confident in yourself, understanding who you are, being proud of that. A bunch of stuff like that, doing hard things. So
that's great.
So hunting trips are things that we do. I brought my family on a pretty good hike last summer. We hiked up to Sunrise Lake in the Tobacco Roots, which is about 11,000 feet, about a 7-mile approach march. And it was a slog. It was a hot July day, but we kept on it, and we made it happen. And they've always seen me working out in the gym at home. And they've taken on that ethic. Both my sons have. They both work out regularly. My older son's a pretty accomplished track athlete now, and he attributes all of his success to the discipline and that work ethic that he learned as a kid by doing hard things. So we did similar hikes in Okinawa, hiking up stream beds to waterfalls, just doing hard things. It doesn't have to be huge doses of it.
Yeah.
But push yourself a little bit, get a little bit uncomfortable, and then embrace that. Yeah. Embrace the fact that it's 95 and 100% humidity, and you're really tired. But hey, look at that awesome waterfall right there.
Yeah,
that's pretty cool.
That's amazing.
Stuff like that.
It's so great.
Yeah.
And you mentioned on that elk hunt, that last one with your dad, never feeling closer to God. How has faith played a role in your life?
Yeah, it plays a huge role in my life. It always has. I think I really found my faith. My father's parents, my grandparents were killed in a car wreck when I was 10. And this sounds silly, but I was a 10-year-old kid, and I remember, thinking maybe that it was my fault because I didn't pray enough. So I started a practice of faith at that point. I'm not a huge fan of organized religion. I think there's a lot of faults with it, but I know what my faith is, and I practice my faith, and it's a huge part of my routine. It's a huge part of my habit. And it's something that I go back to every day. When people can get nervous when you start talking about spiritual fitness, because they seem to think that it's religiosity. It doesn't necessarily have to be. Your spiritual fitness is really your fitness around those things that bring your life meaning and hope. I find a lot of that through my faith in God. I find a lot of that through all those things that we've talked about before, doing hard things, routines and habits that really make me who I am. So it's played a huge role in my life and continues to today.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Is it Bible-based for you?
I read the Bible when I was younger. Really what I have now is I have a book of prayers that I got from a Catholic chaplain prior to my first deployment that, I kept in my body armor with me on every deployment, and really got into the routine of going through this book of prayers that I have a routine of prayers that I'll say every day. You pray before I go to bed at night. And it's really more of an inner thing for me. My wife and I, we beat ourselves up constantly because we don't go to church a lot, and it's something that we wish we did more. And we always seem to find a way to be, too busy to do it, which is a poor excuse. It's something we need to get better at. But it's built on that foundation of faith that came from the Bible when I was younger, and really is sustained through this book of prayers that I have. That I
Amazing. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So, last question.
Yeah.
What's next for you? What else is big on the radar this year?
What's next for me is, bringing Warriors of Quiet Waters Foundation as far as I can. We got a really good vision in terms of where we want to go as an organization. So that's one part of it. We're in the midst of making a bunch of changes to our existing program to bring in these aspects of those pillars of a thriving life that I talked about into our other programs, our fly fishing programs and things like that. So bringing this organization and maxing out its potential as much as I can. The problem set we're facing is huge. There's 1.7 million post 9/11 combat veterans. 74,000 of them have been wounded physically. Over 700,000 have experienced symptoms of PTSD. And PTSD isn't something that you get healed from. It's a matter of managing those symptoms and being able to learn to live with them. And there's a cohort of about 200,000 active duty service members that volunteered right after 9/11, stayed in the military for their entire career, 20 years plus in a time of war. Those 200,000 are getting ready to come out now too, and we got to be ready for that. Yeah. So, doing everything that I can to help Warriors and Quiet Waters Foundation achieve its full potential and helping veterans thrive. That's number one. Number two is making sure that my kids are thriving. My older son's graduating here in about a week and going to Montana State University to get an engineering degree, and really supporting him in every way that I can with that. Helping my younger son, Gabe, figure out what that looks like for him, because he's not quite there yet. Tyler figured it out early on. Gabe, he's a totally different kid than his brother and has different interests, and really trying to help him form a pretty good idea what that's like for him. And that's something that I didn't have when I was that age. Like I said, I really didn't know what I was going to do. Yeah. Staying in Montana, that was it. I want to try to help him come to a little more clear sense of what a thriving life looks like for him.
Are either of them thinking military?
Tyler's definitely not. I've always tried to make sure my kids know what their opportunities are, but didn't try to push the military thing on either one of them. So I sent Tyler to a couple of wrestling camps at the Naval Academy when we were out on the East Coast, just to expose him to that place. And I've talked to him about ROTC and things like that, but he has zero interest at all. He knows what he wants to do. He's going to get a mechanical engineering degree from MSU. Then he's going to go to Embry-Riddle, get a master's degree in aerospace engineering, and then he's going to work for NASA.
Dang.
That's what he wants to do.
He's focused.
Gabe has showed some inclination towards potentially the military. And I'll take the same approach. Know what his options are. Know what that looks like. Answer every question that he has. If he decides to do it, then I'm gonna push him the special operations route, because I want to serve him with the best. But it's nothing that I'm gonna really force on him in any way. So, other than that, just what's life look like for me going forward? Being a great husband to my wife as much as I can, and then trying to be a positive force in the community in any way that I can. I mean, like I said, that's service and leadership. That's where I find my purpose. So that can manifest itself in a ton of different ways. Yeah, so,
just keep fighting.
Yep.
Well, Brian, I always enjoy spending time with you almost more than anyone, and just your presence brings a special thing. And I think every time you walk in the gym or in the room, without you even saying anything, you just make people better. You have that special part of you. You make people more focused, work harder. I think character rises when you walk in the room before you even say one word. And I've always kind of known that about you since the first time you walked in our gym, and very grateful and humbled for the opportunity. And thank you. I appreciate it.
You're much too kind. Thank you. You know, I got to say that, you know, Hunt for Purpose isn't something that could have come together without great partners like Mountain Tough. You know, we wouldn't have been able to do it without you. And all I had to do was just throw the idea at you, and you were on board. And that just, you know, that speaks volumes in terms of your own character, your commitment to helping people, you know, be ready for anything. So thank you.
Yeah, you bet. Thank you.
Yep.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Thanks, Brian.
Thanks, brother.
Appreciate it.
Appreciate it.